Hello friends, my name is Michael McCauley. This is History for Thinkers. Welcome to episode number 6 of the Mein Kampf analysis series, where we are reading through Mein Kampf, breaking it down, and just witnessing some of the crazy thoughts that are present throughout. With that out of the way, let's get right into the analysis. And I actually don't have to go very far from where I had left off in the last episode, because the last episode I left off on, right here, and then this very next little line is just crazy, right? So here it goes. Quote, Austria affords a very clear and striking example of how easy it is for tyranny to hide its head under the cloak of what is called legality. So that is fascinating on a couple different levels. So, of course, strange seeing someone like Hitler throw the word tyranny out like it's an insult. I think that Hitler had this weird worldview where he could kind of see himself as someone who wasn't a tyrant. Of course, he looked over at Joseph Stalin, the communist dictator, and he said, yeah, that guy's definitely a tyrant. I am not a tyrant. I'm for the people, man. And of course, you ask Joseph Stalin, he says the exact same thing. So there you go. That explains quite a bit right there. But he accuses the Austrian state, or more accurately, the Habsburg state, of being tyrannical and hiding under this cloak of legality, hiding behind the law, right? Listen, man, the laws, they're just there. They are what they are. Sorry, we don't want to have to do this to you, the people. We just have to, man. It's the law. Sorry. That's the way he's trying to frame it. But it's when you start to realize that this same exact logic, this same exact argument can be flipped and used against the Third Reich, right? So, well, of course, he's arguing in the context that, wow, there are all these non-German majorities and these anti-German people inside of the Austrian state government and the parliament, and they just hate the German people. They want us extinct, gone, our culture wiped out forever. So he's making that argument. But couldn't you just say the exact same thing about, let's say the Jews under the Third Reich? I mean, Hitler was tyrannical, and he did all of these horrible atrocities under the cloak of what is called legality. I mean, you can literally take this quote, cut out Austria, and just say Nazi Germany, and it still makes sense, and it still perfectly applies. And then you could probably even take the rest of the following paragraph where he just goes on into detail, and if you just type in the non-Germans, replace that with the non-Jews, well, there you go. There you go. You have the exact same argument right there. It makes sense. It fits. But it's not until you really sit down and analyze and find these kinds of things, because I think these little gold nuggets, this is what you get when you actually sit down and you go through a book like Mein Kampf. Like, I just have found so many of these jarring little examples here, and honestly, I'm glad you guys are into it, because I thought I was the only weird guy on earth. It's like, wow, that's the logical arguments in Mein Kampf. Some of them are okay, but some of them are really stupid. I don't know. Anyway, we'll move on. Let's move on before I go on anymore. So he discusses a little bit about the PanGerman movement within Austria and how it had a massive spike in popularity, and then it basically fell off. And the rival party, one of the left-wing parties, the Christian Socialist Party, boomed. Now, he says that the reason for this was because their pan-German leader, the leader of the party, I think his name was Schonerer. I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. You don't have to tell me. I'm sorry. But Schonerer had actually led the party astray, because what he was doing was he was trying to cater toward the bourgeoisie, the middle class, the people that already have some level of comfort within their life, right? People that don't really have to worry too much about the way things are because, yeah, things probably won't change all that much. And, yeah, just, whatever, man, right? I mean, the kind of people that don't care all that much about politics. And Hitler says that this was a bad decision because, well, those people, they just don't care enough to do anything, which, when you look at it, is kind of true. Especially with, like, middle class kind of people historically, once people reach a certain level of comfort, I mean, they just don't care very much about what goes on with the state. I mean, look at how many people even vote, right? I mean, how many middle class people do you know? Decent lifestyles, they're not rich, they're not poor. And they also just don't really care much about politics at the end of the day. Like, maybe they'll keep up with, this new hate social media extremist stuff that's going on today where it's like, the left hates the right hates the left, and everyone's just bickering all the time. But, I mean, do they know who their local representatives are? Right? I mean, I think that's more important. You have a lot more of a say in that than you do who the president is. So that's always an interesting concept. But anyway, so the middle class, they just don't have a whole lot of interest in the realm of politics. Now, Hitler says that the PanGerman movement should have been targeting the lower classes of people, right? The proletariats, the people that are one paycheck away from starvation, from death, the people who can't afford to feed their kids, because those people are very, very angry. And they're not just angry with the state of affairs, they're angry at, I mean, honestly, on some level, those people are mad about just about everything, right? I mean, if you get them worked up enough, you can really take advantage of some people, especially in a time like this when, I mean, you can, if you had enough money to run a newspaper, you could make people think whatever they want. You target that to the lower classes of people and, well, there you go. And the socialists, the Marxists, those kinds of people, they were targeting these people. It was like their target audience, right? If you got to think about it like a marketer. So they were trying to target these people. They were trying to convert them into party members, comrades. And then you had the PanGerman movement, right? This Schonerer guy, he's over here trying to win over the bourgeoisie. People who, as it is, don't really care about politics. And they're just trying to get these people who don't care about politics to care about politics and then to bring about some kind of action. Right? I mean, they're not just trying to win an election here. These are people that want to break off from the state and then join the German Empire. Think about, I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, this is, you want to think about a modern day American example. Think about Texans, right? The Texans who want to break off and form their own state, right? Like their own country, like outside of the jurisdiction of the United States federal government. That would be a big deal. That would be huge. That would change the economy and politics and everything. And that would be honestly, in some ways, a world-changing event. The same thing's going on here. The same level of crazy uncertainty and everything else that would apply to Texas becoming its own independent state applies to what these Austrians are trying to do, what this PanGerman movement is trying to accomplish here. And not only are they, in the middle of Europe and all these crazy powerful governments and whatnot, but the German Empire, to begin with, didn't want them, right? This isn't very long after German unification, I think maybe 40 years. That happened around 1870. So that happens, I mean, this is the 1900s now, right? One generation goes by, and, well, does the German Empire even want you? Probably not, right? Because all the same reasons that Austria was not included in the German Empire to begin with. It would have meant a Catholic majority, and it would have fundamentally changed the demographics of the of the populace, right? I mean, it would have changed how the government ran, how the parliament was run, how, just the way voting was done. I mean, changing something like that, I mean, that is such... You don't realize how important the demographics of a nation are until you look at a question like that. Because in Bismarck's mind, right, the guy who was the unifier of the German people, who created this German empire, he did not want the Catholic Church to have too much control over Germany. And he knew that, well, the Protestant Germans, especially in like the northern areas, northern Germany is much more Protestant and has been historically. Now, you have a German empire that's mostly made up of Protestant Germans, well, you're okay. They had Bavaria, but that was just enough Catholics. That was just enough Catholicism for Bismarck to stand. But those Austrians, man, they would have tipped the scales. I'm not sure on what the exact numbers are, but I'm pretty sure the religious makeup of the German Empire, had Austria been included, would have been like 50% Catholic, maybe more. Somewhere in that ballpark. It would have been such a higher percentage of the overall population. And again, that just would have changed things. So this pan-German movement, they're trying to just fundamentally... So, the German Empire, certain segments in that society probably doesn't even want them. The pan-German movement has been taking off for some time since the separation and the divide, but there are a lot more people who identify along religious lines and don't really care about this ethnicity, nationality thing. There are plenty of Austrian Germans who are like, yeah, I'm Catholic, I live in a Catholic state, that's okay for me, I don't really care about my race, it's not my priority. Still plenty of people living during this time, it's just not an issue for them. So, yeah, for that reason, the pan-German movement basically, it died out. Not completely, but it became this relegated, weird, I think, let's read Hitler's actual words here. A serious club where problems of the day are discussed academically. So, yeah, it's not a political party. It's not a mass movement. You're not changing the way states are comprised. It's a very serious club. I mean, it's kind of demeaning in a way. And this is Hitler saying that, who, right? I mean, he probably was kind of angered by that fact. He was probably not a big fan of the pan-German movement before he had kind of co-opted the leadership. And it became a wing of the Nazi Party. Because, they just weren't targeting the people, the Volk. So here's an interesting quote that we can elaborate on a little bit here. So Hitler says, quote, "The doom of a nation can be averted only by a storm of glowing passion, but only those who are passionate themselves can arouse passion in others. It is only through the capacity for passionate feeling that chosen leaders can wield the power of the word, which, like hammer blows, will open the door to the hearts of the people." So he is basically making the observation that, you need passionate people to spread the word, right? And this all plays into the narrative that he has about himself and the role he plays in politics at the time. Because you got to remember, he's writing this when he's a nobody. I mean, he's in prison, right? So he tried to overthrow the government in Bavaria. He's sitting in prison with his buddies, his Nazi buddies, and he's writing this book. And this is the kind of narrative that he has spun in his own head. That he is passionate, he is trying to save the nation, and he needs to spread this passion to other people. I also think it's kind of interesting because he kind of hits on a principle here, the idea of compounding, that more people get passionate about something, the more passionate people there are, the more they can spread the word. The more the word gets spread, the bigger the movement becomes. And then, well, there you have some real, actual change coming about. So it's interesting how that applies. And then this next little paragraph is really interesting here. So let me just read you this quote. So, quote, "He who is not capable of passionate feeling and speech was never chosen by Providence to be the herald of its will. Therefore, a writer should stick to his ink bottle and busy himself with theoretical questions if he has the requisite ability and knowledge. He has not been born or chosen to be a leader." So this is a real blow to the writers, but I think it kind of so let's break it down line by line. So he thinks that passionate feeling and speech, very interconnected. That is what makes someone a leader. Passionate feeling and speech. Interesting, right? Who of all people would you have guessed value passionate feeling and speech, right? A genocidal dictator, right? Probably, I don't think he's killed as many people as Stalin, but I mean, he's on the top 10 list of the most people killed. So he's got that going for him. And then he has all of this, right? The writers, they don't matter. They're not leaders, right? Just because you have the original ideas, the great ideas that change the world, well, I mean, you're not bringing them into the world, you're not putting them into action, right? So you're, just sit around with your ink bottle, you unpassionate feeler, you speechless imp, right? I just think that I find a little bit of humor in that, because I think that I think if anything, you can kind of see this human tendency to, you identify your own strengths and then you kind of build a worldview around that. So Hitler identifies that he's a passionate feeler, that he's a good speaker. And you see, these are the most important qualities for a leader to have. The people that can't do this, just go play with your ink, man. To think about some theoretical questions, right? So I'm not, that's not a whole lot of insight into the political ideas or anything. I think that's just a little funny jab at Hitler there. But let's move on. So here is a really great paragraph that hits on a really good principle, but as applied to practical politics is very dangerous. So let's read the quote and break some of this down. So Hitler says, quote, "The moment the pan-German leaders, in virtue of their acceptance of the parliamentary principle, moved the center of their activities away from the people and into parliament, in that moment they sacrificed the future for the sake of a cheap momentary success. They chose the easier way in the struggle, and in doing so rendered themselves unworthy of the final victory." So yeah, these pan-German leaders, they shrugged their shoulders. They were weak. They accepted someone else's rules being applied to them. They did not stick true to the people. They instead, right, they went over to parliament. They focused on that. That's why they lost. That's why they're losers. So yeah, this is a really interesting idea. So that it's not just that it was a bad move, but they were unworthy of the final victory. Again, you gotta just have a thought experiment here. What if they had been successful, right? Like, I'm not an expert on Habsburg political parties in Austria at this time or anything like that, but I mean, like, even if there was a slim chance, there was a possibility that the pan-German movement had become popular and successful. I mean, maybe they, right? The criticism that he talked about earlier, where they just were not targeting the lower classes of people. What if they did? What if they did? Would they have been worthy of the final victory then? Like, these are the kinds of questions that need to be asked. Because when you think about it like that, well, that kind of this entire paragraph is kind of goofy. It just kind of takes away from everything that he's saying here. I mean, even if they had not, well, let's say not fizzled out completely, but they didn't have the greatest success in the world, they made a mild impact, right? Which in politics, that's really all you can hope for the most part, right? These people that want to change the world and restructure society at a fundamental basis, like those people, they don't really achieve very much. It's the people that understand that small incremental reforms is going to do a way more good than all this, nice sounding hoopla ever will. But keeping on that point, this kind of shows you, so we can see kind of the flaw in his logic here, kind of the flaws in his thought process, because now he takes it, you see, well, the pan-German leaders, they failed because they were not focused on the people. So us as the Nazi party, well, at least once we get out of prison, man, when we get out of prison, we're going to focus on the people. That's what it's going to be about. It's not so much about Parliament. Forget about, right? Again, it goes back to this whole anti-law thing. So you can kind of see a theme going here. And this is kind of the irony of the Nazi party itself. It is forced to compete in a process and in a system that it fundamentally opposes. Nazis don't believe in representative government or parliament or democracy or like whatever else. That is all just, right? It is a means to an end. It is something for us to exploit to achieve our utopia, right? The Germans never really call it, the Nazis, they don't ever really call it a utopia, but that's ultimately what they're going about. And, right, parliament, political parties, voting, any of this stuff, this is like, it's a trigger on a pistol. You just gotta pull it, man. That's how we're gonna bring about the world that we want to live in. You just gotta pull that trigger. And trigger itself doesn't really matter. It's just something you play with, something you do, So that is kind of the way that this entire Nazi thought process goes. And I just find that so interesting. Because, again, you just have to imagine, what if, and here's another idea, right? I don't think Hitler or any of the Nazis that were part of the movement in this prison cell, writing this book, any of them that were involved in any of this, I don't think any of them expected to have seen the wild success that they did. They are literally controlling the government, maybe a decade later, 10 years, they control the entire state. What? That is if you think about it, that is like winning the lottery. The odds were just not in their favor, but, they played their cards right. They pulled enough of those triggers and they won. So, yeah, it kind of reminds me of this one quote that I read by Hitler. And someone asked him when he was Chancellor of Germany why he wrote Mein Kampf. And he was like, well, if I knew I was going to get here so soon, I never would have written the book. And I just found that so amusing. Not sure, I haven't double checked or fact checked it, but I find the idea that he could have very amusing. But let's move on. And now we come to a crazy little part of Mein Kampf, because he goes on a lot with this speculation, and I feel I always need to have a little disclaimer here, only because I'm just not an expert on politics at this particular moment. But the way Hitler spins it here, even if there is a nugget of truth to what he is saying, it does not fundamentally hold itself up as, like a fitting argument, right? Especially in justification for the actions that came during the Third Reich. So he's talking about how the Czech priests were being installed as leaders in German districts throughout the nation, right? because of the Habsburgs and their anti-German aims, right? So he goes on about this for a couple of pages, but then he says, quote, "Therefore, it looked as if the Catholic Church was not in sympathy with the German people, but that it unjustly supported their adversaries." So this is where you can really begin to see the roots of Hitler's dislike of the Catholic Church. And I feel it's important to point out the Catholic Church, as well as many other Christians, were persecuted by the Third Reich because they held Jesus and God in higher regard than they did Hitler, than they did the National Socialist movement. So for that reason, a lot of these guys were persecuted. But I think right here, where you can kind of see the beginnings of this hatred of the church, in Hitler's mind at least, because there is so much of that going on. So much of that goes on during the Third Reich. And I think it's because he probably bought into a lot of this propaganda. It just kind of painted his mind. It gave him this opinion, well, the church isn't our comrades. They're not for the PanGerman movement. So you can kind of see how a narrative like that, an idea, can get planted in Hitler's head. And because of that, I mean, I don't know how many Christians were persecuted or had their possessions stolen or were murdered during the reign of the Third Reich, but I mean, anything more than one is too many. And it's because, right, Hitler, I'm sure his opinion of the church was very similar to his opinion on all other things, where he never really changed his opinion, right? Like, he formed these ideas, he got the bedrock of his ideology, and like, yeah, that's about it. Like, I can flesh it out a little bit more, get a little bit more detail, but yeah, fundamentally, I'm like the same politically as I was when I was a homeless painter. So again, some crazy stuff. And I think that is going to have to be where I end episode number 6. I'm sorry I have not made it to episode 1 or page 100 yet. Hopefully the next episode. So we're about 6 episodes in, page 95. This is going to be a very long series. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I find it very amusing, although, tell you the truth, it is kind of dark, and I kind of have to take a break. Like, by the time I'm done recording one of these episodes, I'm like, oh my God. But anyway, I hope it's at least enjoyable for you. I hope you get a better understanding of the Third Reich, the politics, the ideology, and the narratives, right? The narratives behind something like that. I think that's where the real value in studying history lies. Because, we can all sit here and be like, yeah, the Nazis came to power in 1933 and they killed 6 million Jews. Like, yeah, those are facts and they are true, and, it's like they are what they are. But, like, it doesn't really teach you anything, right? Like, the numbers could be different or whatever else. It doesn't really teach you anything. And I think the real value lies in understanding the narratives inside of the minds of the people who made that happen. So maybe I'm not quite doing that, even if I'm doing it bad, but I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Anyway, it's a very long outro. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. My name is Michael McCauley. This is History for Thinkers, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.